Chapter 2. Iqbal and Italy. Throughout the ages, Italy has exercised great fascination over artists from all over the world. Along with Greece, it has served as the greatest nursery for fine arts in the history of the human race. There is no other instance of the artistic genius of any people continuing to flower so exuberantly for such a long span of time. For students of poetry, Italy has the honor of having produced two of the greatest poets of the world, Virgil and Dante. So there is no wonder that Italy and her artistic people always fascinated Iqbal. Perhaps in his case there was another reason for this attraction. Three poets for whose genius he had profound admiration spent a long time in this country, and the artistic atmosphere there had played a leading part in molding their genius. These poets were Milton, Goethe, and Browning. Iqbal admired these poets so passionately that he could not but be attracted by the culture and artistic genius of a country which played such a role in unfolding the creative genius of these poets. It was unfortunate that Iqbal could not live in Italy for a long time, and even the brief visit that he paid to that country was not possible till towards the close of his career, but that did not in any way diminish his enthusiasm and admiration for this country. When passing through the Straits of Messina in September 1905, Iqbal had a glimpse of Italy from a distance, and his thoughts traveled to the great Italian fighter for liberty, Mazzini, and he wrote the following lines: "May you prosper, plains of the land of Mazzini, I pay homage to you from my ship." It will be interesting to know why the work and personality of Mazzini attracted Iqbal so much. Joseph Mazzini was born on the 22nd of June 1805 in Genoa and died on the 10th of March 1877 in Pisa, apart from his literary work. Mazzini is chiefly known for his great sacrifices and work for Italian unity and independence. The ideas of Italian unity and independence were not born with Mazzini. In distant past there had been Dante and Rienzi. In the immediate past there had been the French Revolution, Napoleon, and Romanticism. For his patriotic activities, Mazzini was arrested and imprisoned in the fortress of Savona. Released from Savona, he was offered internment in a small town or exile. He chose the latter and went to Marseille. Here he worked with some young men. Then he went to Switzerland and later to England. It was in England that he brought out literary works, including essays on Byron, Goethe, and on the minor works of Dante. Mazzini died in the house of friends at Pisa. He had lived just long enough to witness the downfall of the temporal power of the Pope and the achievement of Italian unity under the House of Savoy with Rome as capital. But his dream was fulfilled in 1947, when Italy was declared a republic. Mazzini was not a systematic philosophical thinker. In him, a first-rate literary critic was sacrificed to the political agitator. His outstanding and permanent legacy is the moral greatness of his teachings. He was an idealist in action who believed that men, though imperfect, could be brought to spiritual perfection. It was for this that Iqbal admired him. In 1910, Iqbal wrote in Stray Reflections that the true sphere of Mazzini was literature, not politics. The gain of Italy is not much compared to the loss which the world has suffered by his devotion to politics. In 1908, sailing back home when his ship passed by Sicily, that gem of the Mediterranean, Iqbal wrote his thrilling poem on Sicily. In this poem, Iqbal bewails the great blow that the driving away of the Arabs from Sicily dealt to the synthesis of East and West that was being achieved under the Arab suzerainty. In this poem he says, "O Sicily, crown of the sea, like a guide in the water's wide wilderness set, like a mole you deck the ocean's cheek and help with your lights the wave wanderers yet. May you be balm to the traveller's eye and foam dance on, your rocks forever the same." Another Italian who attracted Iqbal's attention was Machiavelli. In his poem, Rumuz Iqbal described Machiavelli in the following lines: The Florentine who worshipped falsehood, whose collyrium shattered the sight of men, his faith proclaimed the state as the only worshipful, his thoughts turned the ignoble to praiseworthy, his doctrine caused falsehood to flourish, and plotting stratagem became an art. Machiavelli was born in 1469 in Florence. In 1492, he was given an important office in the Republic of Florence and was later on sent on embassies to France and Germany. He was prosecuted in 1513 for treachery, but was acquitted of the charge on the recommendation of Cardinal Jubai. He retired from politics in 1515 and died in 1527. He wrote his well-known book, The Prince, in 1515, but it was not published till 5 years after his death. He wrote Discourses in 1520. His last book was History of Florence, which was published in 1920. Iqbal has criticized Machiavelli mainly because he advocated separation of politics from religious and moral values. But the greatest link between Iqbal and Italy is that shown by his magnum opus Javid Nama, which has been called by some critics as Oriental Divine Comedy, after the work of the national poet of Italy, Dante. Works of both the poets show a sense of larger life and immortal destiny of man. Iqbal's Javidnama and Dante's Divine Comedy both are poems of spiritual vision and powerful realistic imagination. Dante was born in May 1265 and died in September 1321. Iqbal was born in February 1873 and died in April 1938. Thus, a period of 6 centuries separates these two giants, yet across 6 centuries the two poets touch hands looking together upon the same scene. The main impact of their work was aimed at humanity itself. Both Dante and Iqbal have, through the allegory of a vision, attempted to depict the destiny of the human soul. Recent researchers have established beyond doubts that Dante was indebted to Muslim sources for the original conception of his great poem. Though this question has always aroused the curiosity of many scholars, but in the beginning of this century it obtained greater richness of documentation and more precise information through La Escatología Muslimano en la Divina Comedia of a Spanish Orientalist, Miguel Asín Palacios. The thesis of Asín's book was the analogy between the representation of beyond in Dante's Divina Commedia and that of the Muslim writers regarding the fate of souls after death, and the Last Judgment, the most prominent being Duratul Fakhira of Al-Ghazali and Miraj Nama. In 1944, the Italian scholar Maunrat de Villard published The Study of Islam in the 12th and 13th centuries. In this book he mentions a French manuscript Liber de l'Eciel Muhammad, the Book of Muhammad's Staircase, which was in the Bodleian Library, Oxford, and a Latin book Liber Scale Mohammeti in the Bibliothèque Nationale, Paris, containing the Western version of Miraj of the Prophet of Islam. According to Maunrat, these two books were 2 different translations of one major work on the subject. This proved beyond doubts that there were translations of works on the Islamic conception of life hereafter in the Western libraries. This was further confirmed by the work of Professor Enrico Cerulli on the subject. This great scholar and diplomat admitted the accuracy of Maunrat's hypothesis. In fact, Cerulli's work established the fact that these 2 books of translation were 2 different versions of the same popular work, Kitab al-Miraj, which had been translated in 1206, 50 years before Dante's birth in Spanish by King Alfonso of Castello. Professor Cerulli published in 1950 the Latin text and the ancient French text of the 2 translations of the Arabic manuscript in one of his books, The Book of the Staircase and the Question of Arab-Spanish Source of Divina Commedia. He has proved beyond all doubts that there existed in medieval Europe a detailed description of the Muslim conception of life after death in French, Spanish, and Latin, all accessible to Dante. In Islamic literature, we have, besides the work referred to above, Ibn al-Arabi's Futuhat-i Makkiyah and Mu'ari's Al-Ghufran. There is also a poem in Persian by Shahzori. Thus, in tracing the influence of Dante on Iqbal, we have to bear in mind that Iqbal was intimately acquainted with the Muslim conception of life after death through the traditions of Miraj, immortalized in various Miraj Namas, and the writings of various Muslim scholars recording their mystic experiences or visions. The subject of ascension of the Prophet had always interested Iqbal, and he had even addressed deity and heard a reply from him in his Urdu poems, Shikwa and Jawab-i-Shikwa. He had studied Ibn al-Arabi and Mu'ari and was at least aware of Futuhat-i Makkiyah and Al-Ghufran. He had read vast literature on the Miraj. We have evidence to show that at one time he was planning to write a poem on the ascension of the Prophet. But there is no doubt that researches of Miguel Assin on the influence of Muslim sources on Dante attracted the attention of Iqbal, and his great poem finally took the shape of Havidnama. Thus, while Dante cannot be quoted as a source of inspiration for Iqbal, in a way he acted as a stimulant. Dante's poem is divided into 3 parts, each part dealing with Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. In Paradiso, Dante visits the 7 spheres, the heaven of fixed stars, and primum mobile and the Empyrean. Iqbal does not visit Inferno and Purgatorio, and instead of 7 planets, visits only 6. Then he does not visit the fixed stars and the primum mobile, but visits the Empyrean. It took Dante 10 years to write the Divine Comedy, which contains 14,000 lines. It took Iqbal 3 years to write Havidnama, which contains 4,000 lines. But comparison by the number of lines gives a very poor basis for judging the size of the 2 poems. Whereas Dante's line has 10 or 11 syllables, Iqbal's line has 22 syllables. Still, it can be said that Iqbal has worked on a smaller canvas than Dante, but his subject is much vaster. While Dante is concerned with the resurgence of the Catholic religion and establishment of Italian unity, Iqbal deals with the very future of man. Divine Comedy is the great epic of medieval Catholicism, as Javidnama is an epic dealing with the order that Islam contemplates. For the Italians, Dante reaches the highest pinnacle of their culture and civilization and is regarded by them with just pride as their true national poet. Similarly, for the Pakistanis, Iqbal reaches the highest summit of their culture and is regarded not only as the true national poet, but also the spiritual father of Pakistan. Whatever the sources of his inspiration by writing Javidnama, Iqbal has created a cultural link between Italy and Pakistan that will last as long as there are people in this world who can appreciate great poetry. Both Dante and Iqbal are super craftsmen, and Divine Comedy and Javidnama are great works of art. They both display many points of affinity as well as points of contrast, but it is not possible to deal with them here. But there are 2 points of contrast to which reference must be made here. One concerns the mysterious symbols that Dante uses and which commentators and students have failed to explain even to this day. The other is the crude and vulgar language in which Dante has referred to some religious leaders of humanity. These are serious blemishes in a work of art and are not found in Iqbal. While Italian culture and arts always fascinated Iqbal, he could not visit that beautiful country till 1932, when on his way back home after attending the Round Table Conference in London, he visited Rome. It was on this occasion that Iqbal wrote his famous lines on Rome. In the suburbs of Rome, one is reminded of Delhi, the same story, the same grandeur, and the same fascination. During his stay in Rome, Iqbal met Mussolini, and he was greatly impressed by the forceful personality of the Duce. While in no way subscribing to the cult of fascism, Iqbal could not help admiring the good work that Mussolini had done for Italy. In his poem on Mussolini, he wrote, Mighty Rome, you have been transformed. God Almighty, what all I see is in a dream or in reality. Acclamations of enthusiasm rend thy air, as if your guitar was just waiting for the artist's touch. While admiring Mussolini, Iqbal criticized his policy of colonial expansion severely, and when he invaded Abyssinia. Iqbal wrote on the 18th of August, 1935, "European vultures do not yet realize how poisonous is the carcass of Abyssinia. And yet, when the European nations criticized Mussolini for this venture in colonialism, Iqbal wrote defending him. In this poem, Mussolini tells the European nations that he has done only what they have been doing all these years. Thus it will be seen that Iqbal was always attracted by the Italians and the Italian culture, and even in the domain of thought, his ideas show a great affinity with the thought of the neo-idealists of Italy, and it must be recorded that this attraction was not one-sided. Iqbal's first long poem in Persian language was published in 1915. It was translated in 1920 in English language by Professor R. A. Nicholson of Cambridge. This translation attracted worldwide attention. It was reviewed in the famous Italian journal Oriente Moderne of Rome in 1922 by C.A. Nalino. Since then, a number of articles on Iqbal have appeared in this journal, the more important being one in 1932 by Marina Nalino, and in 1938 by G. Taffanel, and one by Dr. Riazul Hassan in 1940. Professor Bausani has also written several articles in Oriente Moderne and East and West. A few years ago, a Pakistani Christian priest, Father Fernandez, got his doctorate from Rome by submitting his thesis on Iqbal. Thus, it will be seen that interest in Iqbal continues in Italy unabated, but the greatest service that Italy has done to the cause of Iqbal studies is a translation of Iqbal's Javid-Nama and other poems in Italian by Professor Bausani. Iqbal was always keen that his poem Javid-Nama may be translated in a European language, and it is interesting to note that the first European language in which this poem was translated was Italian. Presenting this Italian translation to the Pakistan minister in Rome in the massive hall of the Institute of the Middle and Far East, Professor Tucci said, "Last year on this very date we met here to commemorate Muhammad Iqbal, in whom we all honor one of the major poets of Asia, one of those beings so favored by fate as to assemble in himself and express through the harmony of his verses those spiritual motives that mature in one's consciousness and in consequence act as inspirer of his generation." On that day last year, we read some poems by Iqbal, and this resulted in everyone feeling an irresistible desire to know more about his works. Thus began the translation of the poem Javid-Nama, or Poem Celeste, which Alessandro Bausani has completed with scrupulousness of a philologue and the soul of an artist. Today we are glad to offer you first copy of this edition. Professor Bausani has also translated a collection of Iqbal's poems, which has been published as Poésie. Iqbal provides a cultural link between Pakistan and Italy, and it is hoped that this link will gain in strength as time goes on. By referring to such important figures in her history as Dante, Machiavelli, Mazzini, and Mussolini, Iqbal has depicted the soul of Italy. He has delineated the trials and tribulations through which the Italian people had to pass before they attained their present stature.